So let me just go ahead and start by saying hello and welcome. My name is Polly Meininger. I am the Cleveland Education Programs Manager at the Alzheimer's Association. The office is currently located in the Beechwood area. However, we serve all over Ohio. We serve all over the states. If you have a loved one that happens to be out of this area, there is a local chapter that we are happy to connect you with. But for the meantime, I am your Cleveland girl. I just want to say a little bit about myself. So I am new to my role. I am a caregiver also. I have both of my parents are currently battling different illnesses, but I do this job because it is similar to my father. He is currently battling brain cancer. So while it's not the same, there are some similarities and conversations that we can have today. So I can kind of give you the Alzheimer's Association's printed out formal program, but I also am comfortable just talking a little bit about my experience as supporting a caregiver as my mother, and just letting you guys know any tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. And also, as we continue the conversation, maybe I'm going to learn something from you guys too. So that's kind of the hope of this program. I want it to be as comfortable as possible for you all. Like I said, once I switch over to the actual presentation, I'm not going to be able to see if you raise your hand. So what I'll do is probably every 2 slides, I'll swing back over to this screen so I can kind of see everybody. So if you have questions along the presentation, feel free to plop them in the chat. If you don't have any questions right away, you can hold on to them. And at the end, there is a segment open for us to just have conversations about the material. I will say a lot of commonly asked questions do end up getting answered in the program, but because it is such a small group and we can be a little more intimate, I'm happy to pause along the way. I think what's more important to me is that you walk away with the information that you're looking for so that we can make this a more customized experience for you. But let me just go ahead and I'm going to switch this over and get started. So first, welcome. This is the Dementia's Conversation program. We offer a lot of different varieties of programs, but this one is specifically around conversations with loved ones that's designed to help you with your entire family. So including the person who is showing signs of dementia, but also those who are part of your caregiving team. There's going to be a lot of uncomfortable conversation and topics that we're going to cover today that can hopefully give you some tips and tricks when approaching these with your loved ones. These discussions are not easy to have for you or the person experiences changes in their function. There's a lot of fear of hurting people's feelings when we have these hard conversations because you don't want your loved one to not feel loved. But we're going to talk a little bit about facing challenges related to aging and dementia and being forced to deal with difficult family dynamics. You may try to wait until the time is right to have these conversations, but in all reality, that time rarely ever occurs. The sooner that these discussions can take place, the better. This way, the wishes of the person who is experiencing dementia can be included in as much as possible before the unexpected situations happen in the future. So I'm going to go on into the next one. So the changing needs of the person often signal that it's time to talk. We've heard from many people who tell us that some of the most difficult conversations they've had with their parent or family were about either going to the doctor, deciding when it is necessary to stop driving, and then finally making legal and financial plans to cover future care needs. Keep in mind that as we talk about each of these conversations, I'm going to offer a variety of approaches, but not all of these are going to be appropriate for each person. The approach that will work best for you will involve your customizing it to fit the needs and the preferences of the person who is showing symptoms and also for your family. So today's program, how it's going to look is I'm going to provide a few tips on how to break the ice on having these difficult conversations around some of the most common issues that arise. I'm also going to talk a little bit about helping you plan ahead and build a care team that's going to help communicate well with you, your loved one, and your support team. I'm also going to give you the opportunity to hear from some people who are dealing with similar issues. We have some videos in here, and also, like I said earlier, I have a little bit of experience too, so I'm going to give some commentary about some real life examples that I've experienced, and also some dear friends of mine who have also taken on the caregiver role. I'm also going to try to connect you with as many helpful resources as possible, because at the end of the day, that is the mission of the Alzheimer's Association, is to make you feel aware of everything that is available to you. Now, you may not be thinking of yourself as a caregiver, but you are noticing some changes or signs in the person that you care about that are starting to cause some concern. Often we find ourselves avoiding talking to ourselves about the difficult conversations around these issues for several reasons. Number one, sometimes our family members say they don't need or want our help. I don't know if any of you are like this. My father is probably one of the most stubborn individuals I know. So when it comes time to say, hey, Dad, I don't think something's right, he's always right, and he says no. So we're going to talk about approaching that. We also, we assume that other family members who live closer are taking care of things. And then another one is that we fear that we may take away from the person's sense of independence. We also can have the family disagree on whether or not there is a problem. A lot of times you're going to find around the holidays is probably one of the bigger debates, and those who are starting to show signs of dementia or other related illnesses, the conversations usually start around the holidays because that's when the whole family is back together, and they can kind of notice that there might be a few things that are off. But let's go into something about how you would approach those conversations successfully. So the number one thing is sooner is better than later. Do not wait for a crisis. You don't want to wait for the crisis before having these conversations. You can actually avoid crisis by talking about these issues and taking actions in advance. By taking things early in the disease process, you're going to be able to hear directly from the loved one who is battling dementia exactly how they would like to be treated and how they would like to be a part of the conversation about their health and their care. The next one is developing a plan. So despite the difficulty of these conversations that you will most likely be having with your loved one, they need to take place to ensure that the person's safety and well-being are being thought of. Successful conversations start with the beginning being prepared in advance. So let's talk about what it's like to develop a plan for how to finesse this conversation. The first thing is how to introduce the topic in a way that will be gentle and minimize resistance. The use of finesse goes beyond honestly. It involves understanding how difficult this conversation can be, and it's thinking about how to best gently position the discussion for a positive outcome. Also consider what you will do regardless of how the person responds. So like, for example, if you ask the person whether he or she would like to know if they've noticed any changes in their own functions, in most cases, the person will say yes, therefore that will allow you to begin the conversation. However, in some instances, such as my father, they're going to say no. And that can be a little challenging to navigate. So when they say no, he or she does not want to know about what you've noticed or focus on the fears so it's time for you to focus on the fears that accompany the changes and how important it is for you to talk about the changes openly. The actual conversation about what you've noticed may have to come later, but it's really important for you to start the conversation about, here's why I'm concerned that things are changing, so that we can eventually have a conversation if I notice those changes in you. The next thing is to take notes about the changes that you're seeing. So that's really important. Begin observing and taking notes of examples of behaviors that may concern you. Like, for example, my father, he, for the longest time when we would do pizza night, he would drive to and from the pizza's place. It was 3 blocks down. There's 3 turns involved, and that was it. One night he got lost on the way back. He took 5 turns instead of 3, and then he ended up on a golf course. So I'm going to go ahead and say that was like a level of concern. We were noticing that something was a little bit off among some other things. But take those notes, take those examples, write them down so that in the future, you can use them as part of your discussion of why you want to seek additional help. Next, again, so write things down so you're not going to forget important points that you want to cover, and bring those notes with you when you have the conversation. Be prepared to talk about your own feelings using I statements, and try to avoid suggestion or blame on the other person. You want to make this feel as less, you don't want this to feel like a gang up opportunity. Also, be gentle in your discussion. Keeping the person's feelings in mind are really important. You want to avoid having the person feel like they're being ganged up on, and also they may be scared about what they're experiencing because it's not an easy thing for someone to navigate in their own mind. The next is practice in advance. Rehearsing talking about sensitive topics with other family members will help you feel more comfortable when you have the actual conversation with the person who's experiencing symptoms. Consider possible solutions to offer with the different conversations. For me, I like to practice on my sister. She and my father have a similar temperament. So I know if I can get through the conversation with my sister successfully, I'm going to be able to have the conversation with my dad. And maybe that's similar for you and your loved ones, but I definitely do recommend practicing in advance because like it's been really talked about, these are challenging conversations and it's a lot easier said than done. The next one is to initiate the conversation in a really relaxed and well-rested and comfortable place. Sit close to the person, use empathy, speak from your heart about your concerns. At the end of the day, this is a conversation with your loved one, so it should be filled with love and respect. So we're going to talk a little bit about one of the first challenging conversations that can arise, and that is conversations about going to the doctor. When someone in your life exhibits changes in thinking or behavior, it's important to be aware that it could be signs of Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. There are changes, though, that are typical of aging, such as taking longer time to remember the name of something, needing a reminder about how to use the remote control. But you may also start noticing issues that go beyond your typical aging, like the individual is getting lost in familiar places, or they're withdrawing at social functions, or they're asking the same question repeatedly and over, or forgetting recent events. People with dementia typically first recognize signs that have to do with forgetting how to do things they used to do with ease. So that could be managing money, that could be doing a hobby that used to be so much easier for them, or frankly, as simple as remembering appointments that maybe that used to be a weekly occurrence for them. Whatever it is, once they start showing these signs, it's important to take notice of it. Conversations can go more smoothly if you reference an exact example of why maybe they need to consider going to the doctor. And it helps to just make it a little bit more smooth. But sometimes the person may be reluctant, they could be fearful, maybe even angry when you try to get them to seek help. This can be because of his or her feelings about the disease, or it could be because of the effects of the disease itself. It can also reflect on his or her cultural traditions, beliefs, or just stigma about the disease itself. But we do have some tips and tools that can help an individual just get to the doctor. And I can say it can feel awkward to approach someone about the changes that you've noticed, but many times the people already have noticed these changes themselves. They're just not ready to talk about it. It could be because they're afraid. Denial is one of the most basic ways we all have to protect ourselves from feeling overwhelmed. But changes may be due to something other than Alzheimer's. And acknowledging that this can help a person, that it could be something else, and that they need to take appropriate action can really be encouraging to figure out what's wrong so you can get back on the right track. So this is Donna. So Donna is my first of my videos, and she's going to talk a little bit about the importance about getting help and why it was important for her. So hopefully this goes well. All right, I'm going to have a moment of confession. I'm experiencing technical difficulties. So actually, I'm going to switch over and just talk about it from my experience. So I'm going to pause the share and come back over to me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my dad. So we were talking a little bit about how, he was going to get pizza and he was starting to get lost. Around that time, there was actually another family emergency that was occurring, and he was in charge of picking up people from the airport, bringing them back, shuttling them, hosting them. And my father is a super social, outgoing individual, and we started noticing he was kind of behind. He was kind of shut down, and because we were just dealing with another family medical emergency, my mom was like, hey, I've noticed he had a leg tic. His leg was bouncing a lot. He started to slur his words a little bit. He was showing signs of forgetting easy conversations. And anytime that we were trying to talk to him, he would just forget. He wasn't with it. And frankly, when we had to figure out, my mom was able to leverage that. Unfortunately, at the time, my aunt was going through a medical emergency that was left unchecked, and then it became a real serious issue. So she was able to leverage, another family member saying, hey, like, something was wrong with Lindy. We didn't know what was going on. We need to go get you checked out to make sure that everything is okay. And because of that, I mean, he was very reluctant to go. He was always been a super healthy man, maybe one too many donuts, but that was about it. He was very with it, very on top of most things. So it was really hard for him to admit that something was wrong, but he definitely knew something was off. So with the help of my mother's conversation, just saying, it's okay to just get a checkup. Let's go get checked up. We were able to identify that he was dealing with, in this instance, brain cancer. And actually, because of that conversation and that candidness, we saved his life. So I think while they are challenging, they're super important to identify what's going to happen next with your loved one and making sure that they get care as soon as possible. And I'll go back to sharing my screen so we can continue on with a few more examples. So sorry you didn't hear about Donna, but she also had a similar experience about the importance of just having that candid conversation. So let's go into it a little bit more and talking about just scheduling that original doctor's visit. So it could be all that you need to do to officially get the ball rolling. Other times, just being honest and direct really isn't enough, and the person needs a little more support or direction. So here are some ideas to kind of help you. First one is suggesting is using the words that are most comfortable for the person. So sometimes be aware of the person may be sensitive to particular words. They could not like the idea of having Alzheimer's. So for example, you could say, hey, let's go talk to the doctor about the fact that you are having trouble with doing something that you're used to doing, rather than saying, we need to go see a doctor because you might have Alzheimer's. One's a little more aggressive, one's a little more understanding. I think the importance is knowing who you're talking to and knowing how they would best respond. And I think as a loved one, you're going to know the best approach for you to give to your, as a caregiver. The next one is to suggest the Medicare's free annual wellness visit. So the annual wellness visit, which has just been offered at no charge by Medicare since January of 2011. It's a visit that is developing or updating a personalized prevention plan that can help prevent disease or disability. It includes an examination of the patient's cognitive and behavioral changes that may indicate a form of dementia like Alzheimer's. Many older adults haven't actually heard of this benefit, but taking advantage of it can be a way to get a person to have their cognitive evaluated. Something that I just want to hit hard is that this is available to you. So if you are with a loved one and maybe they're a little hesitant to go get a particular diagnosis, building in an annual wellness visit is probably the best way to go about approaching it, because then also if you build it in to make it more annual, your doctor is going to be able to see a change yearly. And it's really going to be able to help pinpoint what next steps need to be made, if next steps do need to be made. Another thing is just pair it with an enjoyable outing. I know with us, when we took my dad to the hospital, we paired it with going to get ice cream. It's so simple. It's going to be a really challenging experience if you get bad news. So take the moment to make it enjoyable and pair it with something that's going to make your loved one feel cared for and relax a little bit. The next one is invite family members to communicate concerns or questions with the doctor. Whether you are able to be there in person or not, you can prepare a list of your concerns and questions and provide the information to the doctor before the appointment. Because of the doctor-patient confidentiality and protections under the HIPAA regulations, the doctor will not be able to speak with you about his or her patients without a signed release. But if the family member agrees to it, it can be very helpful to get a signed release for information that will allow the doctor to communicate with you as a caregiver directly. This release can be signed at the doctor's office. I will say in my particular instance with my mother, it was a really strong move for her to be able to have those conversations directly with the doctor about my father, mostly because my father was having a little bit of a difficult time retaining information that was really important for his caregiving plan. So in this instance, my mother was able to get the proper documents signed so that she could be able to listen to the conversations and take more diligent notes so that we could be more aggressive and active in our treatment plan. The next one is, if your loved one is still reluctant, there is this therapeutic fib that we can do. There may be times when the person with symptoms is extremely reluctant to see the doctor, regardless of your attempts to use reason. People with Alzheimer's often experience a reduced ability to make good judgment and make good decisions. So sometimes this contributes to the person's ability to admit that they do need to go see a doctor. In these situations, the person's safety and care is going to come first. So you may need to utilize a technique called the therapeutic fib to get the person to visit the physician's office. To get someone to seek a doctor, some family members or friends tell the person that the doctor's visit is required by insurance. The purpose of that is in order to authorize, to make it seem like it's not out of your concern. It's really, these are the necessary steps that you need to take in order to continue the insurance plan. It's, it is a little challenging, and I hope that you don't need to go into the fib state, but at the end of the day, do what you need to do to get your loved one to get checked out, because like I said, it saved my dad's life from personal experience, so I can only hope that it would be a big benefit for you and your loved ones. So I'm going to switch back here too before we have the car conversation, because that's it's a big one. Okay, so this is the conversations about when you need to stop driving. I don't know about you guys, but for us, this was really challenging. So I actually am really grateful to these tips that I'm going to talk through because this one, there's a lot of reasons why people are hesitant to lose their driving. But as we've learned from others, these conversations about driving may be one of the first and difficult conversations family need to have after a diagnosis. You may notice signs that your family member's driving has changed, such as accidents or tickets, moving violations, or things that could be a little more subtle, like there could be scrapes on the car. There could be just like minor little mistakes while they're driving that they've never made before. Whatever it is, a lot of us are going to need to know when it's time to stop driving. People are often reluctant to consider this issue because they're afraid to relinquish their independence. Denial of anything is just denial that anything is wrong can also be super dangerous, can allow for a dangerous situation to continue. But by dealing with this issue early on, it can really ease the transition. So this is another video of a gentleman named Chris that was having the hard conversation with his father about stopping driving. Unfortunately, my videos aren't working, so I'm going to come back to stopping the screen share for a second. And I'm going to come back over to me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about not my father, actually. I'm going to talk about my grandfather. So one of the things that I noticed when I was young, I think I was my sophomore year of high school. I had called my grandfather to pick me up because my parents weren't available, and it was an after-school program. It was fine. It was all good. But this is around the time that he was starting to have Parkinson's. And at the time, I didn't really understand what that meant as a high schooler. But, grandpa was coming to pick me up. He's my favorite grandpa. Don't tell my other one. So I was all excited because usually what we did is we would go get ice cream. And then we would go, he had a pool in his backyard. So we'd just go like hang out by the pool. And like, it was a great experience. But this one time stood out to me in particular because he picked me up. And we were driving, and he was on the wrong side of the road, speeding. So I had to gently remind him. I was like, "Oh, Grandpa, I think you're on the wrong lane." And he goes, "Oh, silly me," and just casually goes into the other lane, like nothing is wrong. So that was step one. So I had to tell my mom. I was like, "Hey, Mom, like Bob was doing something funny. He was speeding down the wrong side," which then triggered a conversation with my mom, her sisters, and my grandmother to say, "Hey, he's starting to show signs of dangerous driving. And I will say it took about 2 years for us to enact a plan to get him officially off the road. And that is scary. A lot of the time, like, we tried a couple different tactics. We hid his keys and we thought that was working, except clever man found the keys. We didn't realize that he had found the keys until one day we went out. He drove a minivan and we saw the minivan had some yellow streaks on the side. And then when you opened the trunk, there was a bunch of red bottles of wine and his favorite candy of Dots in the back seat. So we knew that he went on an adventure. So eventually we had to sell the car, basically take away any of those opportunities for him to basically drive. It was really hard for him. I will say eventually it was fine. And we're going to talk about this in the next points of like how we made it okay. But I will say it wasn't easy, especially because he grew up in construction. So he was a very hands-on, active gentleman and very used to being the caregiver of the home. So for him to have to give up some independence was really, really challenging for him. But let me talk a little bit about some strategies that we implemented that hopefully may help you as you kind of decide about these conversations as well. So I should probably start by saying there's no single moment that defines when it's time to take away the license. It's really going to depend on your loved one. You can incorporate the person's doctor and other professionals into the conversation to see what they advise as far as the best way to go about it. In Chris's video, he talks about what his approach was, that he went to the doctor's office and had them actually write a prescription saying, you need to stop driving. And that was effective for him and his family. But whether the changes of driving are due to Alzheimer's or not, they could just be aging. Here's some ideas that people have found helpful when discussing this really sensitive topic. The first one is you got to plan ahead before an accident occurs. I think this one's pretty crucial. You want to make sure that before you start noticing the changes in ability to drive, it's really important to just talk to the person candidly about, hey, at what point do we need to have you stop driving? Making them have a little more control in the situation is going to help you in the long run. Many families find it helpful to have an open discussion and develop an agreement on how the person would like to be recognized when it's time to stop driving, such as noticing more mistakes on the road, could be scrapes on the car. But whatever it is, when the time comes, the person may not remember the conversation that you had. So one tip that's very helpful is coming up with a driving agreement. So write out an agreement that kind of talks through what you are agreeing as the person who, as your loved one, is saying, okay, if I am making this many mistakes or if I have this many scrapes on my car, I'm signing this agreement to recognize that that means it's probably time for me to stop driving. That's huge. The next one is to just express your concerns about specific changes that you're noticing. I think it's important to let the person know that you care and you support them, and just reinforce the reason for your concern. You can use specific examples to show that these are real problems. Like last week, you did something really different. Here's what happened, and this is why it concerns me. But make sure it's not an attack. Just make it as simple as possible, as diplomatic as possible, saying, like for me, Grandpa, I noticed that you were speeding down the wrong side of the road, and it wasn't until I indicated to you to get over to a lane that that was not okay. Can we address that? It concerns me because I don't want you to get hurt. Those are simple conversations. Those are conversations that you can begin by having. And I should not use the word simple because that is not a simple conversation, but it is a simple approach to a complex conversation. The next one is to appeal to the person's sense of responsibility or concern for others. Let the person know that you care about them and you support him or her, and just reinforce that the reason for your concern is, I'm going back and forth. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to skip ahead and say you just need to appeal to the person's sense of responsibility and concern for others. So I think one of the biggest things that I did is when he was driving on the wrong side of the road, I said, what would have happened if you had hit someone else? Activating their sense of concern and responsibility for the people around them may help ease the conversation to be more realistic about when it's time to stop driving. This was Sheila. So Sheila also was talking about how she was having an issue driving with her father. One thing that she found to note was that it really was important for her to activate her father's sense of responsibility. So the safety of the person experiencing challenges, as well as the safety of others on the road, was the key issue that she needed to address. It also helps that she had had the conversation prior to when he started showing symptoms. So they already had a plan in place that they were able to activate, and she was able to show her father the contract to say, it's time for us to activate the contract. Didn't make it necessarily an easy situation, but it definitely was easier because they had the conversation earlier rather than later. The next one is to offer alternative plans for transportation. This one was key for my family. We knew that our loved one had particular places that he wanted to be. So he was big at the country club. He had his weekly poker night. We had to make sure that he felt reassured to know that this wasn't going to take away his social or his independence. As a family, we were going to come together and make sure if he needed to get somewhere, we were going to get him there. That's crucial. I think that's one of the biggest fears that individuals have when they lose their sense of freedom with driving, is that they won't be able to get where they want to go, where they want to go now. It's important to make sure that you know that that may be a concern for them, and that you really think through with your care team about what is the best appropriate way for you to come with a solution rather than building onto the problems. And then the final one is just incorporate a voice of esteemed professional and as an esteemed professional, and have empathy. I think it's really important that you utilize the resources that are available to you. Ask a physician to write a letter or prescription stating the person must not drive, or just use empathy in your conversation. Think of ways to foresee and minimize the person's sense of loss. Consider talking about this from a standpoint of retiring from driving rather than giving something up. And I think the key word there is retiring versus giving up. I think the way that you frame the conversations and make it come from more of a place of this is a transition versus this is a loss, it's going to be really helpful as far as a strategy for you when you come into conversations. And then the next one is, it's just really important to respect the other person's sense of independence. While it's important to help them understand that you're concerned, you just need to make sure that this is coming from a group effort. So again, planning ahead, having the conversations early, so while your loved one is still able to communicate effectively the way that they would like to, is really crucial in helping develop a strong plan. All right, so this is the next one. She's also talking about empathy and how it was successful for her of coming from a place of love versus coming from a place of authority or attacking. Unfortunately, again, my video is not working, but I feel like I've kind of touched a little bit on what she would be talking about. So we're going to go into the final slide before we transition into the next tough conversation that is commonly had with people who are battling dementia and Alzheimer's. But one of the ways that we all provide ourselves with choices to maintain our independence is by making legal and financial plans for our future. Many families who do this only will be taken by surprise when dementia is going to enter into the picture. So going into the next part of this program, program is the legal and financial planning. This one is also, like many of the other ones, pretty challenging. So this is Chris again. He was going to talk a little bit about the importance of understanding the cost of this and where the money is. A lot of the issue that arises is that in the very beginning, you want to take action quickly, and you want to have honest conversations about it, because you do not want to run into the issue of your loved one who's battling dementia or Alzheimer's having all the power over their legal and financial matters, because once they only have that, you are unable to, it really limits how you're able to help them once they stop losing understanding of where they are in the situation. So let's go into this next one. So some people may have plans in place, but it still may be uncomfortable to discuss their financial status with you. You may also feel reluctant to do anything that may come across as intrusive. Just talk about it. Making a legal and financial plan early ensures that the person's preferences are included in the plans and that the family will not need to make rash decisions. I had a good friend of mine who his father had early onset Alzheimer's. And unfortunately, they, when they first got the diagnosis, they were given all of the paperwork to go for the legal and go for the financial. But what they ended up doing is they only finished the legal paperwork and they didn't end up the financial paperwork. And when it came time to paying for assisted living, the family didn't have access to that loved one's funds because the proper paperwork wasn't addressed and there wasn't enough time to come up with a plan so that they would have access to those, which really caused a lot of financial stress on the family. So again, it's just important to talk about it. Understand where your loved ones' resources are so that as a family, you can come together and identify if something were to happen, how would that loved one like you to have access to supporting him, whether it's through legal or financial. Again, this one's Julie, who's talking about what her conversations were about was how she was navigating conversations with friends. So a lot of friends were trying to give her advice on what to do and what not to do. And finally, what she came to understand was there's going to be a lot of people throwing advice at you, but be strategic about whose advice you want to listen to. So our recommendation is talk to a financial advisor or talk to your physician. Get a little bit better understanding of what resources are available to you from a more professional sense, and then take advice from, you can take advice from your friends or your loved ones, but we definitely recommend seeking some professional assistance because it is a lot to navigate. And we want to make sure that you are aware of all of the resources that are available to you. So now we're going to go into tips to help with the financial and legal planning conversation. I should just start by saying that this is a really sensitive issue. And this is the kind of thing that someone with dementia is really going to fear having this conversation. Our fears about how this conversation will be perceived may keep us from having this conversation. Don't let your fears stop you. Also, approach the conversation from a standpoint of being in that person's case. So think about it throughout the course of the disease, needing these documents in place to help him or her get through this process, because there's going to be many steps along the way and there's going to be a lot of adjustments. You could have a well thought out plan, but you need to be able to have the flexibility to adjust to the situation. So having these conversations early on and identifying what at the end of the day your loved one would like is really crucial. So we're going to start by explaining that you're in this together. These discussions may seem to go against some of our social norms and represent a shift in the family roles. Like, for example, for my father, he was no longer the one who was in charge, and that was challenging for him. And it definitely went against the normals for his kids to be dictating, or not dictating, but heavily suggesting approaches of what we need to do now, where he may not have been the one fully in charge toward the end. But these discussions may seem to go against, like I said, the family roles. Understand that having these conversations will help you and the person with dementia make the plans that you'll need to do with your best care. And they're also going to allow you to connect and enjoy your time together in the future. It can be a tremendously reassuring thing to let the person know that you will be a part of the process now and in the future. This way, the person you love can feel like you are on the same team and you're with them for the long haul. You're not just there for the beginning. You're going to stick by their side through thick and thin, and you're going to get through this together. The next thing is to start by asking questions about the gathering documents. So these are the things you want to think through as far as think about the conversation as a chance to ask questions rather than tell the person what they're doing. So the questions that you should consider are, what documents are in place now? Where are they kept? Who has the copies of the documents and who needs to get those copies? So who's missing that's going to need proper documentation of whatever you want to talk about? The next one is, who should be reviewing these documents? Should it be the family? Should it be the professionals? Who do you want to make sure has their eyes on these documents before things progress? And the final one is just pull all the documents together so that it's all in one spot, and for all the people who are going to be involved in the future of the caregiving, know exactly where to find these things in case of an emergency. The next one is to explain these are standard plans and they need to be made as we get older. Reduce the resistance to the process by explaining that we have to have these discussions and complete these documents, because even if you aren't battling Alzheimer's and dementia, having a plan for as you age and how you would like to be cared for as you go on to your next stage in your aging process is crucial. So I recommend, even if it isn't around Alzheimer's or dementia or any other illness, it's really important to have an understanding of what your loved ones are looking for in their caretaking preferences. The next one is break the conversation into parts and try different times and locations. The key thing, as you may be assuming, is that this is a lot to cover. This is so much for someone to download and process and really think through. So don't plan on just having one sit down and getting through all of it and trudging through, because that's not going to be an effective way for you to make sure that each step of the process is given the proper care that it deserves. And also, if you only have the conversation through the phone, make sure you plan to have it in person as well. You can also write a letter to get the conversation started, but have it written down so that you know what you have discussed and where the future holes could be in the conversation. And also, don't feel like you have to cover everything in one sitting. It's going to help you do the planning if you break it down into smaller segments. And the final thing is involve others as needed. Ask a financial advisor to help with the conversation, or involve a brother or a sister. Some families make decisions to pull all of their resources to ensure that care can be provided and the expenses can be paid, because this is an expensive endeavor. It's not affordable. And the other thing is to it's really important to make sure that the financial situation is secured so that your family can help make the best long care choice for you. I can't stress that one enough, in making sure that the family is understanding of the plan and that they are aware of the financial resources available to them, so that they are making smart strategic plans that are going to be able to be seen all the way through, versus what happens when the money runs out. So I think, again, it's really important to just have these candid, hard conversations as early as possible and involve the people that you need to be talking to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Now we're on to the care team. And let's talk about who's on your care team and who you should be assembling for this almighty group. So just as you're having these difficult conversations and it's challenging, caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease is also a challenge. But there are steps that you can take to make things easier for everyone involved. As our veteran caregivers can tell us, no one can do this alone. Everyone who provides care for the person is part of the team, and the team works best when there's good communication. The first step is to begin the conversation by taking other people on in the care team. So let's take a look at seeing who those people are that you should be considering. So starting first, the care team, family. I think that one is probably the baseline of your care team. Families typically look at their primary care doctors to help with making medical plans. Other medical professionals, now it's the medical team is the next part, sorry. So families will technically look at primary care doctors to help making medical plans. Other medical professionals who specialize in the area of dementia care may also be included in helping make the diagnosis of what your loved one is currently battling. The next part is your peers. Peers are a tremendous support system, and they're huge as far as the disease progresses and you continue to need care. Friends can offer so much help for emotional breaks and emotional support. I know my parents, we have what's called the supper club, and they take turns taking my mom out on a weekly dinner away from my dad. And I think, and while one of the couple is with my mother, the other one's taking care of my father. And it has made a huge, huge difference and a significant impact on my mother's just overall mental health as she is doing her part as a caregiver. So I definitely recommend, if you haven't activated your peer network, don't be shy about it. Your friends are your friends for a reason, and they will come support you when you need them most. The next one is your workplace. So everyone who's working with a member of the care team should also contact their company's HR department or employee assistance program to ask for caregiving benefits. You may be surprised at the resources that are available that you may not have been aware of prior to. There's also a lot of things that it's also pretty helpful to let your boss know what you are going through, because caregiving can be a 24-hour process, and you want to make sure that they are understanding of your life change and how they can best support you and while you can continue to perform your duties. The next one is the community resources, which is us. The Alzheimer's Association could be the library that's helping put on these important presentations. Take a look at your community resources, follow the blogs, even Facebook support group chats have been super helpful for my family. Just don't be afraid to look and see what's available to you, because that's going to be a big, it's going to make a big impact on your journey through all of this. And then finally, as far as resources that are available to help you, I'm going to talk a little bit about Alzheimer's Association. So we have so much to offer. We have a 24-hour hotline that you see here. They are available to you, and on the other line are a huge group of just professionals that are experienced in all sorts of caregiving, whether it's through patient care, whether it's through social services, or whatever you need. They are there to help you 24/7. Whenever you call, there will be another person on the line. You won't get stuck with a robot. You'll get stuck with a person who knows what's happening. It's been an invaluable resource to many people that I know that have needed their assistance. So if you have not already activated this resource, please do so. We also have in-person programs or online programs such as this. So we do many programs that are over a variety of topics. We get some that are super specialized and some that are a little more generic. We talk about, there's some that are early signs, such as the 10 warning signs. We have understanding Alzheimer's dementia. In addition to dementia conversations, we also have effective communication, which is another program that talks about how to effectively communicate with your loved one so that they can feel heard and understood when their behaviors are going to change, because dementia can be really challenging in that way as well. And then also we have support groups available to you. And we also have a caregiving program that was just released in the Cleveland area for caregivers who just need like an hour or two of a break. There is a program that you can apply for that we will send a professional to come watch your loved one for an hour or two so that you can do your groceries, or you can go do your nail appointment, you can go see your favorite movie, whatever you need to do to care for yourself in this process. We want to help support you because it is a team effort, and we want to make sure that resources as a caregiver are available. And then this is the big one. Remember, no one can provide all of the support alone. Just be sure to take the proper precautions to build your care team and talk with your family and concerns as they arise. This can be a super isolating experience, or it can be a super unifying experience. I highly recommend taking a moment to figure out how you can unify with your community of loved ones, and it's going to make a world of difference. And again, here's the 24-hour hotline. So I recommend, if you don't already have this, please do so. If you aren't able to write it down right now, don't worry. If you just Google Alzheimer's Association helpline, it will pop up in 3 different ways, and it is easily accessible to you as long as you have internet access.